This is a Snarbolax, and today we're going to fight it. Hello everyone, my name is Bloody Elevator. Here we are once again with Spire Knights. This time we'll be facing the first in-game boss, the Snarbolax, a mythical beast that inhabits this forest. And today we're going to fight it. But first, we have to go through about 2 stages before we face them. So my weapon loadout that I'll be using for this run is a flourish and a blaster. I chose these weapons because a flourish is a piercing weapon, and a majority of the monsters that you'll be facing here will be weak to piercing. So you'll want at least one weapon that has piercing damage. Just so you know, the boss also does have a piercing weakness. The flourish isn't too difficult to get at this point in the game. You can get the recipe from the bazaar, which is the place you need to go to when you need to buy recipes for standard issue weapons like the flourish. The other weapon that I'm using is the blaster, because it's a weapon that does normal damage. In this case, it's an all-rounder that I'll be using for long range, as some of the monsters that we'll be facing aren't weak to piercing, so we'll need something to cover that. Also, it's a decent weapon for dealing normal damage to a wide variety of monsters that we can't deal with just our flourish. My armor loadout is a cobalt helm and cobalt armor, with a defender shield. I chose these as my gear because you're automatically given the recipe and some materials for crafting said recipe after completing a few missions prior to facing this boss. So I found that they were the easiest thing to craft at the time of recording. This should help me get through the stage with minimal difficulty. We'll use the flourish on enemies like wolves, who are weak to piercing, as well as any enemies that aren't resistant to piercing. And we'll be using the blaster against enemies resistant to piercing. Other than that, we should be okay here, assuming there won't be any lag interrupting us. So after making the Spire Knights video a few days ago, I thought it'd be fun to make a few more videos going on a boss rush in this game. Unfortunately, this game doesn't have a boss rush mode, so we'll just have to make do with what we have and face them one at a time. Except there will be a lot of missions in between each bosses, some to run errands or some to help explain the story. But we're not here for that. We're here to kick butt and have fun in this game. There is also endgame armor modeled after this boss. It's called a Snarbolax cap and Snarbolax coat. And the bonus that you get for wearing this set is a medium damage bonus when you wear the Snarbolax armor set. I do have the Snarbolax armor set in my other Spire Knight save. I probably won't be making it in this playthrough because in order to make it you need a shadow key, which is something you either have to pay with energy, in other words you have to pay with actual money, or paying an absurd amount of in-game currency, crowns in this case, at the auction house. And you'll have to survive going through the shadow levels, which is essentially the more difficult versions of the boss fights in this game. Everything else about the stages, including the fights that you had to do before you get to the boss stage, are also more difficult. I've tried using a shadow key before with other Spire Knights players before, and the difficulty curve really spikes, and it's not easy, even with endgame equipment. And the game will try to overwhelm you with large amounts of enemies, as well as adding spikes and elemental status condition traps in parts of the maps that didn't originally have those things. I can't guarantee that we'll be fighting the more difficult versions of the bosses from using a shadow key, especially alone. I think we'll just have to settle for fighting the bosses in their standard forms, and then we'll call it a day. Maybe I'll get back to it later, when the holiday events happen. We just reached the Snarbolax boss stage. This boss has a somewhat interesting gimmick. boss is actually invincible and can only be struck when they hear this bell. You ring this bell, and they're vulnerable now. Attack! Like mentioned before, this boss is weak to piercing attacks, so we'll be using our flourish on them when they're vulnerable. Who installed this bell anyways? I'm not sure if it's lag, but sometimes when you hit the bell and the boss is right on it, the game won't recognize it. I'm not sure why. I gotta say that I really like the design on this boss. The combination of black, blue, and red just works so well. It makes the boss look both interesting and menacing. So you just dodge the attacks, ring the bell, strike the boss, and repeat. And just like that, Snarbolax was defeated by us, with little to no difficulty. And that's all I wanted to share with you today. Thank you for watching.